with either the financial or regulatory or political support to carry on as an institution. And, you know, sometimes an anchor can be the wrong thing. You know, if you're a Christian, then, you know, an anchor isn't necessarily a good thing. So with that in mind, we're going to explore the notion of anchor institutions and connectivity. And I'm going to ask each of our panelists to give us a sort of 5-minute introduction to where they come from, the work that they do, and also maybe, you know, what anchor institution means to them. Colette, would you like to kick us off?
Thanks. So as noted, I'm the manager of Indigenous Public Library Outreach with Public Library Services Branch. It's under the Ministry of Municipal Affairs, Government of Alberta. And we provide operational funding for libraries in Alberta, and of that, SuperNet funding. So the SuperNet is a network that connects 429 communities in Alberta with high-speed internet, and of that, over 300 libraries are connected, and we help facilitate that. Currently, there are, because of all sorts of legislative and funding issues, there are only actually currently 2 Indigenous communities with full-time libraries in Alberta. One is Kainai in the south, Kainai First Nations Public Library, and one is in northern Alberta, Paddle Prairie Métis Settlement Public Library. So what we do is we provide and pay for a dedicated pipe for libraries, which offers speed, stability, and security. That's probably what everyone wants when you talk about internet. But one of our primary goals is also to provide that access and equitability for rural library patrons, people who otherwise wouldn't have access to high-speed connections. So for me, that's kind of what the anchor institution means. To me, just to give that access for people that otherwise wouldn't have access. And in part of the ways we provide support is we pay for builds for new libraries, and that establishes a point of presence. And we're happy to, like, hopefully that offers incentive to hive off to companies or to community networks from that point of presence. So generally it's about, they've averaged about $38,000 to put that in. And then we also pay for the monthly connectivity fees, which otherwise would be probably cost prohibitive for our small community libraries. And that's just generally in Alberta about $6,000 a year per site. In addition to that, we offer access to the internet through public access computers if people don't have their own devices, free Wi-Fi, and in some instances we even loan laptops and devices in some of our libraries. And we also offer a suite of e-resources. So that includes newspapers, magazines, TV shows. And something I'm really excited about in my position is a new resource that we're working with Edmonton Public Library called Voices of Misquachie. And it offers local oral histories, culture, archival photos, and language resources through Markutu software. And I know Roy is here and he's going to speak to that later. But we're also trying to do more initiatives like that. To create a platform for folks to get those stories out. And for me, again, I'm not very technical, so it's about impact to community. Most government documents, at least in Alberta, are only accessible through online sources and to be filed online. Job and resumes, often all of that has to be done online. Homework help. Someone had mentioned earlier about some students graduating through the help of access through internet, and that's something that we can provide. And of course, just access to social media. So all of that is what an anchor institution means for me. Thanks.
Siri, can I hand over to you? My apologies.
Thank you, Steve. Welcome to Inuvik, everyone. It's a privilege to be here to speak at this lovely summit. My name is Yuri Raska, and I'm the station manager for the Inuvik Satellite Station Facility, which is a facility owned by the Natural Resources Canada. So I'm a federal public servant. I've lived in Inuvik since 2010, January. I haven't been here very long, but I feel like I've really grown into the community and become a stakeholder. And events like this happen, and to be able to speak at them, certainly to share a community perspective and to gain the knowledge to help my fellow members in the community access opportunities. So a little bit about me. I've worked for the Inuvialuit for about 6 or more years, and then from then on I was very fortunate to engage in this particular position at the ISSF. The ISSF is a 500, or actually close to 600 hectare piece of property by the airport that is now home to several institutions, which I like to call anchor institutions now, and certainly a catalyst for the fire background, and then we'll get to it. So sometime before 2008, there are several institutions around the world looking for a geographically gifted area that they can locate their infrastructure to speak to Earth observing satellites. So we talked a little bit about LEO broadband satellite technology earlier today. This is a little bit different. This is looking essentially via radar or optical technology, observing the Earth for reasons of national security, sovereignty, for reasons of natural resource and disaster mitigation, things like that. And many nations around the world deploy these pieces of hardware, called satellites, to essentially keep an eye on their borders and their resources. And you need to be able to speak to these satellites, and certainly being so far north, polar orbiting satellites, we have greater visibility. We're able to see them more often, and therefore it is strategic to locate here. So going back to about 2008 to 2010, we have the German Space Agency, the Swedish Space Agency, and the French Space Agency come together and essentially engage the local community here in Inuvik. Some of the entrepreneurs here already knowledgeable about telecommunications, certainly a very valuable resource to them. Also the territorial government, the town of Inuvik, and then of course Natural Resources Canada, who has 2 other stations across the country. They decided that Inuvik is the place to put their infrastructure, and we'll slowly start to fast forward. So now up at the ISSF, we have 4 13-meter antennas which are used to communicate with these Earth observing satellites. And they do a multitude of things, and hopefully some of you will come out, or all of you will come out to visit and get more of the details of how that all works and how this kind of came to be. But to get to the point here, what has happened is with the Canadian government and the community behind, we now have access to several agency here. We're downlinking their information, and we're talking to their satellites from this infrastructure that's located in Inuvik's backyard. We've got Swedish Space Corporation, which is a service provider, also servicing their own satellites, but servicing satellites of other nations. So we have quite a few. There's about 27 satellites that are licensed to operate there. So essentially we have the Swedish Space Agency, the French Space Agency, the German Space Agency. We even have the Japanese Space Agency there. We even have non-for-profit research and development physically there, speaking to greenhouse gas satellite Claire. And this is now, we're at I guess, reached a critical mass where, you know, until obviously we've been looking at connecting to fiber for some time, but that critical mass has brought fiber to Inuvik, and this is essentially the catalyst to having that. And now, of course, a redundant loop. I think that without having those anchors here, we probably wouldn't see fiber here today, and we'd be looking more towards the broadband satellite and continuing to use the microwave as a backup. So this is it's a phenomenal story, maybe not necessarily linking going on here today, but where we're at today is looking to use those anchors in the most best way to, asking ourselves, how does the community benefit? How do the Indigenous groups benefit? By and large, for the last several years, there has not been enough of that. And now with the physical presence of an NRCan employee, for example, and a few more of you involved, that sort of conversation is now playing out on a daily basis, where we're seeing major ground being covered in terms of developing new infrastructure for the community and listening to what the community wants and looking 10 years down the road. So it's definitely amazing. And of course, along the route, we have many, actually about 4 communities along the route to Inuvik that have access to fiber that would not have had that if it wasn't for the ISSF being here. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Thank you.
But with the ISSF,
in this whole region. I think my take on the whole issue around anchor tenant is, or anchor partners, can be broken up into 2 different areas. One is the stories that Penny discussed this morning, and like I was introduced as part of KNET, as the former director of KNET, and but I've been gone for 5 years now, and so I moved to Fredericton. I'm at the University of New Brunswick now, and so a lot of my work has been involved with the First Mile Connectivity Consortium. I've stayed connected with KNET policy level, and we'll be talking more about that in another panel tomorrow. But whenever the partners that we're working with under the First Mile Connectivity Consortium, FMCC, and the website is firstmile.ca, and I'd encourage people to go there because it's about the communities. It's all about the individuals in the communities, the work that the individuals are doing in the communities, and the different organizations in the communities that are asking and finding ways to make use of these technologies so that the opportunities are local, the jobs are local. And so everything that was just presented is really important to being able to address that need at the community level. But whenever I was working for these First Nation organizations, Penny told the story about the bus ride to Ottawa. I was on the bus and sleeping, and so were the chiefs, so were our leaders. And they wanted telemedicine. So that's what we worked at building and finding a way to be able to do it as a second-level support service, as Penny described. And we did that with the health department. And now there's a telemedicine service at the community level, but also at the second-level support service level. And so the jobs, these are all run by the organizations, and the individual communities are the people that are participating in that and making the decisions of what kind of services are going to be delivered. Another example that we got involved with was so the parents wanted their kids to be able to stay home. So e-learning, we saw that this morning. And so we set up an internet high school as part of that whole second level support service. And so First Mile Connectivity Consortium is made up of these agents, these organizations, First Nation owned and controlled organizations that serve a number of different communities or serve an entire region. I'm not sure whether Tim Waitduck is going to be a part of this discussion. Were you able to get hold of him? Oh, okay. But Tim is the president of the First Mile Connectivity Consortium. And he has his story to tell, just as Penny is a member of the First Mile Connectivity Consortium. There's other representatives. Sally is part of the First Mile Connectivity Consortium. And as a group, they're directing and influencing we're making in terms of trying to influence policy, influence decision makers, influence the types of programs that are going to be delivered, whether they're the library programs or the kinds of industry that can come to these communities. We were out at Tuck yesterday, and I was mentioning this to, I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Yeah, and like, you know, and the hosts, and what we witnessed and what we experienced is lots of opportunities in that community. We heard about some of those opportunities from a very corporate perspective today, in terms of building possibilities of dropping a underwater cable, having a drop go into Tuck, and the opportunities that, or putting satellite into Tuck, or like all these different corporate anchor tenants, and how what are they going to pay to Tuck instead of Tuck having to pay them to benefit. And so, like, how change takes place, I think, is really an important aspect of whenever we talk about anchor tenants, whether it's from a corporate partner or a government partner. Government plays all the different programs, like, you know, and everyone is working in their little silos. So one of the concepts that we've worked on at the First Mile Connectivity Consortium is a whole community approach, and being able to look at the land where the people have always been, and the people that are always going to be here. And people need to get over this thing about, like, you know, people are going to move to the city, and, like, you know, and they'll be all well taken care of within these nice environments, because the people want to be on the land. That's where they are, and that's where their ancestors are, and they've been there thousands of years. And why is that going to change? Because of whether it's technology or the government or the corporations or whatever, whoever wants to take care of these communities, the communities are going to take care of themselves. And I think anchor tenants need to find ways to contribute to that growth and that development, whether it's education, health, infrastructure, all of the different sectors, libraries. And that's our challenge, like, you know, from coming from outside, and what I've been able to learn and what I've been able to benefit from as a very privileged white male, and I think a settler who has felt very welcomed and very, well, honored to be able to be a part of this and be able to be in this position that I'm in. So I just want to thank everyone for that, and I'll leave it at that, and we'll see where the questions go. Is that okay?
Okay, for the discussions, I think we can just use the table mics. So, yeah, some very, very different
computers through whatever internet connection we can get so that people have access with the hopes that it'll become full-time. But in this case, the will after the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People really spurred the provincial government into just saying it doesn't matter about legislation. We're going to fund this because it's the right thing to do. And I think that I'm hoping that continues throughout the world, throughout Canada, throughout North America, and throughout the world, because it's ridiculous, this kind of legislation tripping us up and in not providing kind of human rights, really, in my mind. So I'm really glad and proud of my government and my boss. If she's watching, I'm sorry, I said it yesterday, but she said it would be over her dead body that this funding ever goes. So important. So I applaud, just get over the political hurdles. Yeah.
Brian.
I think that fits very nicely into that. What I was trying to end with is the responsibility, and I think Claudette, her comment is really appropriate and important. In terms of in this is that there's a responsibility of government in terms of the Truth and Reconciliation here in Canada, the work that needs to be done in terms of the recommendations that have been made for that Indigenous communities have been handicapped in so many different ways and put into these government boxes in the past, and like the Telecommunications Act and the Broadcasting Act, and like they tend to see it as from a very corporate consumer-based perspective within the policies that are created. And if one is taking a look at the communities and contributing to the entire community, like as Claudette is saying, like the role of libraries, that's one sector, but it encompasses all those sectors as well. And I think we can do better, and we need to do better whenever. Hearing them. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Yuri, do you want to comment on this?
Sure, thank you. I think in the context of the ISSF, certainly maybe not well positioned to provide access to some of the outlying communities because it's not what we're doing. What I'm working very hard towards with the community here, with both Indigenous groups, is to leverage every aspect of the anchor presence and the activity and the growth. There's a real thirst for what we're doing here at the two ground stations, both in the private and the government side. So there's more and more coming to this region. So how best do we leverage that to essentially, in the case of what I'm looking at, is creating a model of government to community collaboration and government industry collaboration to provide for those wants and needs of those remote communities. So in the case of Tuck, for example, getting fiber, I mean, that is, the links might not be obvious, but there's certainly a fit for the government, and there's certainly a way that we can learn from what we're doing here in the community of Inuvik in terms of collaborations to help sway and to find ways for government to work better. So we don't always do that, but we can. I know we can. So that's kind of where I come from. Yeah.
Thanks. I couldn't help but reflect earlier. One of the participants in the infrastructure session was talking about, building fiber wherever we build roads, wherever we build utilities, and obviously that's a very important thing to do. I mean, there's plenty of research that establishes that adding fiber to a road only increases the cost of the road building by about 1.5% to 2%. So a very good idea, but it strikes me that I mean, the one thing that didn't get enough attention in that session was not just the building of infrastructure, but the pricing of infrastructure. And it strikes me that, while we put fiber along roads, we don't always treat fiber roads. It's treated as a commodity, right, to extract maximum value from. And whereas we don't treat roads like that. We want as many people as possible driving on those roads to actually drive economic growth. And once again, I'm back to Cree Cable here, and Mike's got a community of people who are, whose demand for capacity is going non-linear, but his costs are not going down non-linear. So here's a tough question for you. I mean, what is the role of government in ensuring that fiber gets treated like infrastructure so that we can actually unlock all that pent-up demand? So I'm going slightly off-piste here, so I hope you don't mind. Do you want to?
For me, it's the responsibility of government and everyone outside of a community that's involved in working with that community to put the community first. And and whenever we talk about if we're going to invest in any aspect, whether it's health, or education, that it be recognized that there's a community network. And you mentioned Cree Quebec, Cree Cable, but it's like for the way, whenever we talk about anchor tenants, we often talk about it from a very corporate perspective. That, we'll take care of the health sector. Don't worry about the hospitals. So somebody in hospitals take care of, outside of the city, the community, is going to approach the corporation. The corporation buys or purchases, it takes care of that facility, and then every community then is left with the responsibility of having to run their own ISP, without that anchor tenant, because it's been taken over by the corporation. And so whenever we talk about anchor tenants, it's very corporate. And instead of looking at the whole community and contributing to that community, as Erie just talked about, in terms of how he, because he lives here, he's able to try to find ways to leverage that resource that he brings and the financial resources that he brings. And I think every government program and every government piece of legislation needs to recognize there's a difference between what happens in the city and what happens in the rural and remote communities. And unfortunately, what we're doing is transferring all of the problems that exist in cities, I could call it, but and we're transferring that to these small communities, and the small communities are held responsible, rather than recognizing them as unique opportunities to learn from. They have their medicines, they have their teachings, they have their relationship to the land, and like, you know, and like I've benefited myself, and I know can, you know, with people like Herman and others that, like, you know, the teachers that are there, and instead, like, you know, and the medicines that are there, the healthcare messages, and that's content. Whenever we talk about content, like, you know, that's real content that is being produced at the community level, but it's just being taken instead of valued. And we're not paying the real costs of doing that. And if we started to change our perspectives to see that building these relationships and in a respectful and honorable way, in a kind way, like using the teachings, the traditional teachings, I think we have an opportunity to create a better space for our grandchildren and the future. Maybe we'd even take care of the earth instead of building more oil trans. Anyway, don't again. I'll stop.
Colette, I saw you nodding there. I feel like you.
Sorry, I agree with most of that. The government should look after the welfare of its citizens, basically. And like for me, I always look at everything through a library lens because I'm a librarian. But so I think that there has to be a real commitment through policy development and through funding commitments for sure to create the infrastructure. And then I agree with Brian. Like every time he says it, I just have to nod my head because it is about community and it's about the community needs and what the community wants, right? So it has to be not even consultation, but like we can build a library, but how that looks in that community is going to be different than the one down the road. It's up to that community to. So when he was talking about medicines, like I've been talking to some folks on reserve and like having a medicine library, right, where people can go pick medicines in the summer and then have that accessible to others that may not be able to get out into the bush throughout the winter or whatever. Like how that looks, it doesn't have to look traditional. It's up to the community to decide. But I think the government has a place for the welfare of its citizens to make sure that that infrastructure is in place.
Yuri, would you agree with that?
Oh, most certainly. I suppose I could share a few comments. You know, you hit it on the head there with the perspective and again, policy. And I'm starting to see, I'm very new to the federal government. I've only been around for about a year now. And it's quite interesting to see the policy shifts and the focuses, you know, on the remote and the Indigenous communities. It's late, obviously, but the beauty is that now that we're engaging in this new particular way, you know, let's say from the context of an Inuvik, we're bringing students on for workplace experience. Well, we're learning more from the students, and the students are learning from. And this is a phenomenal thing, and we're accepting that, and that's driving our little group. But we're a little group of, you know, mostly engineers and the shift from you know, doing the sort of the standard talk to those who think they know what they know, and put it out for RFP and see what we get, and then end up bringing people from the south up to develop something in a land they know nothing about, and it's always a disaster, and then the taxpayer pays double, triple, or whatever it is. You know, the shift is now essentially trying to engage with the government and speaking a little more openly and at the level that people want to be spoken to here in the community, and engaging Indigenous businesses to develop what the needs are 10 years from now. And so, you know, exciting news. We have a First Nation and Inuit partnership, you know, that is growing here and is looking at developing some major infrastructure that's in support of the ground station and the knowledge economy here in Inuvik. So this is, you know, it's phenomenal. And it's happening here. So again, perspective, and at the same time, you know, writing new policy, but very happy to keep amending that and in the favor of what we're going to learn in the next few years here. So.
So I think we're gonna try and catch up a couple of minutes on the next session, but I'd like to leave you with one last question and a final. I mean, Brian, I thought your comment was very interesting about how sometimes that if a hospital is targeted for corporate social responsibility support to connect them, that act of nominal good actually then robs the community of an anchor tenant. And for me, that brought up an interesting tension that I've observed in networks around the world, is that some places you have very successful municipal community network initiatives where the municipality is deeply embedded in connectivity initiatives. Southern Ontario, there's some very interesting things going on in terms of connecting municipalities there. But in a lot of instances, community networks survive in spite of municipalities. So if I think of this fantastic fibre network in Lancashire and Northern England, the county council did their best to kill them off, partly through kind of I think corporate capture, but it's very hard to know the truth of those situations. But very often you get municipalities that have their own sort of plans that don't embrace bottom-up networks, that don't embrace, that are much more driven by traditional sort of telco models. What advice would you offer then to municipalities on how to become their own anchor institutions?
Just do it. I worked with the chiefs a long time, and the one thing is we made every mistake. We tried this, we tried that, we went, and the point of it is that we learned every time, and the opportunity to learn locally and to be involved locally and to know that it's a decision that's being made, I think is very important in that process of engaging and building that capacity locally. Because what we always did was there was always a sense of ownership. That the principles of OCAP really do apply in whenever it comes to infrastructure, the water systems, the electrical systems, the telecommunication systems. Instead of seeing it as a business, some of the communities have actually delivered it as a service and as a municipal run and without charge to the citizens. And that is difficult to sustain over a long period of time, but they've done it over a long period of time. And so my point about there's lots of examples. And I think what we do and what we're doing here is looking at sharing and talking about a growth that is happening exponentially quick as the technologies escalate. The different models exist all across the board. And we can, if there is an interest, if there's a kid who has a cell phone who wants to be online, then let him do it. The kids are leading the way. The elders in our community, in the communities I worked with, wanted to be able to help their kids feel good about being in their communities. That was it. There was health and all these other things that the leaders had to deal with, but the elders wanted to see their grandkids and wanted to help their grandkids. And so the grandkids are the ones that we work with all the time. They're the ones in the schools, in elementary school and high school, through co-op, what you're talking about. That's the kind of effort, local effort, that has made the big difference, because the kids end up owning, learning and trying, and then they find the allies. Being an ally, being a good ally, I think is a responsibility for all of us outside of the community. So, I think just do it. It's a good first step, and baby steps. Nothing wrong with taking your time. I heard some discussions about, but it's doing it your way, doing it the way that works locally, and just do it. Help the kids.
Got it.
Just as we were speaking, I just kept that adage, you know, give a man a fish, eat for a day, teach a man to fish, he'll eat for the rest of his life. And that's true. People need a sense, all of us need a sense of ownership to create something that's going to flourish. And I agree completely. Any locally sourced solutions are always going to be the ones that are going to matter in the community. Otherwise, it's not going to thrive. And just from a, like, I do things because I think they're good. I'm Métis myself, and I want my community to thrive. I want all my fellow Métis and First Nations relatives to thrive, because that's the right thing to do. But you know, as part of kind of the man government or whatever, I have gone to sessions where it's actually really economically important too to do that, right? Like, there are so many, like, just from a purely kind of conservative financial standpoint, to have people vested in things makes it actually profitable, like, down the road, right? So if you're looking at even on that level, it's important to have that community ownership. So.
Thank you. Last words, you?
All I can say is keep the conversation alive, because you never know who's listening. And you know, in the case of this, it's all about, yeah, certainly community ownership, community-driven. It's amazing to see some of the projects that are, you know, doing really well as a result of that. So.
Thank you. I hope that made the issue of anchor institutions clear to you. It is multidimensional. I think that's the short answer, and contextual as well. But I think the last word for me would be the just do it. That's good advice. Thank you, everyone.
Put her in the old place.
Well, that's about as tame as I've ever seen Brian. For those of you who know him, I sat with him on the bus for the 6-hour ride to and back from Tuck, and probably the best conversation I had with him was when he was sleeping for 3 hours. Thank you. I'm just kidding. Go way back. If you want to read more of what Brian and Susan are doing, pick up one of these books here, the connectivity book on page 34. One of the illustrated diagrams are the difference between urban and rural connectivity and the paradox there. Now I'd like to invite up Chris Rizzo from MLab to do a flash presentation. Is Chris in? All right, there he is. Oh my God, I sat on the bus with you, Chris. I didn't even know. Yeah. All right, thanks.
It's on the podium. Just give him Okay, hi everybody. I'm Chris Rizzo, and I work for on the Measurement Lab project. But first, I'm honored to be here and talk to you about that a little bit. And tomorrow I'll be moderating a panel to talk about quantifying challenges or measurement, essentially. But first, I'd like to thank everyone in the community for inviting us all here. Your hospitality has been wonderful, and I really appreciate that, as well as thanks to ISOC for inviting us here. So, Measurement Lab, what are we? Let's see if I can get this to work. I'm a technologist with the New America Foundation. This is my employer, but I work on a collaborative project. Oh, I'm holding it backwards, maybe? I don't know. I'm a technologist, but I can't make hardware work. Where do I point it, guys? You could advance it for me, too, if you want, if you don't mind, that is. So, I'll try now. There we go. Okay, so Measurement Lab. We are a consortium project that is made up of public interest institutions like the not-for-profit where I work, the Open Technology Institute at the foundation, which I mentioned a minute ago, industry partners, and academic partners. So our community looks like this. Well, what do we do first? We have a platform. It's a service that provides an open source, open data, speed test, and other internet measurement tests. So you're familiar with speedtest.net, which is a commercial enterprise by a company called UCLA. And there are others as well, but we were formed in 2009, 2008, 2009, because back then there wasn't an open source of data for researchers and community advocates to understand internet service around the world. And so some academic partners, hey, could we get your data to understand what internet service looks like in our communities? They wanted to study the internet to make it better, and these were like computer science researchers and the like, right? So Google, of course, was like, well, I'm sorry, but that data is our proprietary data, and you know, we can't do that, but and where I work, Google's networking group, some people in that networking group that care about the internet and people's experience of it, and then some folks at Princeton University who had a project that sort of was the base for our beginning software, you know, that lives on our servers. But so right now we have 150 plus server locations worldwide, and we survive by the nurturing our relationships with different types of folks on this screen, which is essentially companies who want to donate staff time or dollars to the project, or in-kind money, that kind of thing. Academics who want to study and use data that results from our work. People who write the code and design those tests and want to host them globally. Research and education network partners were some of our earliest site hosts, sponsoring transit and hosting for where we, the servers where when people like us run a speed test, they call out to a server and run that test. Lots of other partners too, and I don't want to drone on too much, but I support journalists in my work who want to use our data, and researchers, again, who want to use that. And we also have some government and regulatory partners, and other entities as well. Some of them are national regulators in some countries, and some are folks like Sira, who's sponsor server locations in Canada, which I'll show you in a minute here. These are some of the experiments that we have hosted over the years. You may not know the names of some of these. Internet 2's a network diagnostic tool is our primary speed test, which is a kind of corollary to speedtest.net. And that's the one that's kind of the biggest thing. It's the most open one. We have the best relationship with Internet 2, and I'm going to tell you about an anchor institution project that I'm working on with some folks at Internet 2 in a moment. So you can see that most of these were developed by academic institutions, and so there are computer science researchers who are studying the internet. Okay, and this is kind of a real sort of nutshell of our history over the past 10 years. We passed our 10-year mile mark for running the platform, and this kind of shows the transition of that and where some of our earliest servers have been on different continents in the world. And here's a map that lives on our website. We've got over 500 servers in 130 locations around the world, and we're always looking for new partners to help get better geographic placement in different areas where we're not yet. So you can see South America, we're looking to, that's an area of expansion for us in the next year or so, but there's always some interesting collaborations to pursue in different new relationships. The big reason why I'm here. And in Canada, this is what that looks like. So Sira sponsors 6 sites connected through Hurricane Electric Transit in, let's see if I can remember all the Canadian geography here, but you all know it better than me. Toronto, Montreal, Moncton, Vancouver, help somebody, Calgary. Thank you. Winnipeg, that's the other one. Okay, so you can tell right here, okay, so we don't have anything up this far for sure, but I'm very interested in Sira's new IXP that they're building and exploring new relationships with other partners to get better connectivity to, well, our server is closer to where everyone in the world is our real goal. lots of supporting partners, as I mentioned. You know, this is how we thrive and how we kind of diversify our funding. So one of the interesting things, you know, that I get asked is because Google is a big partner. You know, I work on a team at my work with about three or four other people, and there's about 5 people in Google New York office that work on the project as well. It's a very interesting dynamic because, you know, we're not a Google product. We have a team at Google who works on an open source public project, and it's not a Google product at all, which can create some interesting conversations, particularly when we have disagreement about particular things. Like I was just having an email earlier about where should we host a new server and what type of location should it be. And it's an interesting position to be in, to say to a group of Google engineers on the team, you know, I think you're wrong. They like to think that they're right all the time. Not to say care about the internet, but I think it's an important distinction to call out because, you know, Google provides funding to the project, and, you know, it's something that I'm happy to talk more about with you. Like, the influence of Google does not equate in this situation. More often than not, we're telling them how things ought to be happening. So huge amounts of data. The NDT test, as I mentioned, is our primary speed test, and it currently happens since 2009, which is a huge amount of data, huge data size. With, you know, it's our easiest integration. If, you know, I've talked to partners, I was just talking to a gentleman from Cree Cable about our test and how, you know, you can put this test and integrate it into your website and promote that as a way to gather speed information data about your own communities. The data still goes to MLAM, but you can keep copies of it, and that's something I'm going to touch on in a second. Yeah, and so the biggest spike here, this is the spike graph of our NDT data, and the big jump there is when the Google search team integrated our test. So this gets to the test of like the question of how do tests get run? How do we gather this data? You know, what happens? That happens in a number of ways, and the biggest way is through integrations. You know, so for the longest time, we just had the test running on our website at measurementlab.net, but Google's search integration was super, right? That's that huge spike. But we also work with hardware manufacturers like Bingbox, and build tools like a Chrome extension, right? So you can install our Chrome extension. That's one we publish, and you can run it in your Chrome browser, schedule it to run regularly, and you get to keep a copy of that data in your Chrome, on your computer. The folks at Bingbox integrated our test as a part of their box. So this, if you're not familiar with Bingbox, they're just a small little hockey puck looking thing that you plug into your network, and it does things like all sorts of things. Like you can look at their little dashboard, and it tells you things about your network, like what other computer is connecting to it at your home or your business, and it looks at your Wi-Fi as well, and will tell you, you know, it does this interesting thing called a digital fence, where it, you know, kind of looks to see who's trying to connect, or what are the nearby networks around you that, you know, might cause interference. And so it's a toolkit, essentially. They integrated our speed test, and so then you also get a bandwidth measurement from your connection, wherever you place that, and look at the nice, pretty graphs of it over time. Before I move on to the next slide, you know, one of the interesting integrations is the Sira Internet Performance Portal, and many of you probably know that that platform. One of the tests they run on that platform is our speed test. So I'm also learning quite a great deal by being here with you all, and one of the conversations I was having yesterday on the bus prompted me to add this slide just to touch on data sovereignty, because when you talk about walk away with everything and you don't get any benefit, right? Or whoever they're working with, and I know that's happened. I'm familiar with this scenario happening in Native communities in the US from past work I've done. So I wanted to touch on this very briefly. When you run an MLab test, you are consenting to run that test and you get the results back right away for your own benefit. And let's say you go to the MLab website and you run their tests, that data, you get the that are measured at that point, and then our data goes into a public repository that's open to everybody. Now that doesn't have any personal information about you. It has the IP address that your ISP assigned to your home router, right? It's available to everybody, and MLab makes aggregate data available for particular areas. And one of the things I do when I talk to people who want to use data or understand it about a particular, let's say, US state, you know, let's look at the median speeds by county, for example. That's a pretty typical request that I get, and one of the ISPs from which those tests were run. However, you know, and I'm going to touch on it in a second, when specific organizations have integrated our tests, and I'll show you a couple examples of that, you have the ability to capture that data and save it locally for your own purposes as well. So I'll show you a couple examples of that where we've helped communities build a platform to, let's say, survey people who are about to take the speed test and say, like, who is your ISP and how much do you pay for it, and what's the advertised upload or download speed, whatever questions they want to ask. And then they save all those results along with the speed measurements, and then that's theirs to own. So I'm happy to talk more about this issue with anyone who might be interested. But just to show you a couple more examples, obviously the Sira portal you may have seen, but that's the map of Canada, and you know, there's some people up there who have run tests on it up here in this part of the area as well. So some of you know about MLab, that's great. And then if you go to our website, I don't have an ability to click on that example, but if you go to the measurementlab.net or viz.measurementlab.net, you can explore our data by locale. And so you could type in a city, you could type in a region, you could type in a country, and then you can select the time range, and you can see the upload speed, download speed, aggregate average measurements, or medians, I think, and then the latency measurements as well. And then you can compare. So we produce that site as a way to sort of provide better access for people to get sort of step into our data and realize what it's about. And then typically, I'll send people I'm supporting there first, and they can explore some things and really see what types of data they can get from our data set. And then somebody wants to go deeper, then I work with somebody who has some data specialization or has some ability to work with databases and things like that, or just give them the data exports myself. So that we could dig in deeper than what our website will give it. We also have been working on some open source software products. This one is a map of Pennsylvania. But the software underlying it we've used in several communities. And the goal here, and you can see the form that I was talking about, the web form, you can't really read it there, but it says, are you running this test from your home or a business or a community anchor institution, like a school or a library? So they wanted to ask questions and start out with that. And this is software that runs on your community's server or your organization's server and integrates our test, integrates a form that you can ask questions of your community about, or people who go there to run the test. And then it can aggregate and produce the map that you see there, and I believe this one is if you got some GIS people in the room, I know at least I've met one person who does GIS, any shape area. So we could use counties, we could use provinces. In the US, a lot I use the census block or census tracts, you know, and these are, so this platform lets data come in via our test, and the website allows people to ask questions and collect information just to understand their community. And so a few examples here. Was our first group. The city wanted to understand broadband speeds and have a third-party data source. Out service in the city were showing them. The city said, well, or the ISPs would say, this is where we've got service, this is how good it is and how fast it is, and the city wanted to have a sort of comparative data source, right? So that's the real value that MLab brings in this particular scenario. And then Stevens County is near Spokane, Washington, and so we're working with the county coalition, very people, libraries, people in county government and otherwise, and they're studying broadband in their county and in their region in order to better understand how they need to prioritize spending or what types of things they need to go to ISPs to say. And touching into the last panel then, we wanted to share a little bit about some research work that I've been conducting with in partnership with community anchor institutions. And so we spend a lot of time just kind of running this platform and making it available to everybody and supporting people who want to use that data. But increasingly now, we've had the room to expand, to develop client, we call them the clients. When you run a test, I call that the client, because you run the test and the server's on the other end. And there's some folks here that have been doing similar work with Sira to measure internet speeds from small devices. So instead of asking everybody in your community to run a test, what we're doing is putting the software that does that on a small computer and then placing it in a school or placing it in a library or placing it in many different schools and libraries, and then having that data get sent to MLab, but also having it get sent to a platform, a server where that community of anchor institutions can look at that for the service at their libraries or schools. And this started with a project I did with a colleague in the Alexandria, Virginia public schools that kind of was the starting point for that. We put about 12 of those devices into about 6 to 9 school classrooms, and that test ran over a couple of different months, and we produced a report. But mostly we learned a lot about how to do this effectively for our test infrastructure. And then more recently now, we were able to receive a grant from the Institute for Museum and Library Services, which is the federal agency in the US that provides subsidized service for schools and libraries. Matt actually mentioned earlier about you receiving money from them, subsidies. So this grant is to expand this system to make it easier to use and deploy, and all of that will be open source software as well. Our goal is to produce a toolkit over the next 2 years so that this is more of a turnkey thing that we could share with communities who want to do this sort of work that leverages MLab's infrastructure essentially. So that's an exciting project where we're beginning to work with, we'll be up to 60 libraries in the next 2 years. And we're doing that, we're starting with the software and the work that I've already done, but we're not coming in to that community and saying, here's what we got, you want to use it? It'll be great. No, we're starting with a workshop, participatory design workshop, where we invited libraries to participate, and we're going to have a workshop with them in a couple of weeks actually in Chicago, and we're going to talk to them about what they need, what they want in this type of system. So that's an exciting project to be beginning. This is just a picture of, well, the case study we did. If you look for that on our website, or if you want me to send you a link to it or something, let me know. That's the study I did in Alexandria. And then this is just a picture of one of the devices that we used in both of those projects. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of preview. Basically, I'm managing those devices in kind of a cloud service, and we're building that out now. But essentially, this is sort of a way that I can just install the software on a small on the SD card and put it in there, send it off to a library, and this is the control panel where I can manage it and have remote access to it and stuff. And then this is just a preview of how the dashboard looks like in my prototype. And so it's kind of techy. I mean, it's just graphs and, but this is an example of the kind of data that we're hoping to share with libraries. And it's just a time series graph of over time, I can see in this case, it's 2 of these devices, one on the Wi-Fi at my house and one plugged into the wired jack. Oh, I'm all out of time. Well, you get the idea, and I'd love to talk to you more. Thanks a bunch. There's my email. But just come up and talk to me. I'd love to share more about Measurement Lab with you, and thanks again for letting me be here.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Chris. We're going to take a 20-minute break and get some air, and if you smoke, go outside and have a cigarette. If not, handle some business cards network here. So we'll convene in 20 minutes. Thank you.
Be starting momentarily.
Did you know that Inuvik is actually further west in Vancouver?
I know it's called Inuvik.
Inuvik, yes. Inuvik, yes, okay.
Gwinzi. Drin Gwinzi. Drin Gwinzi. Drin Gwinzi. Gwinzi. Okay, we've all had our coffees and we are now awake. Ane din ni he, Shori Crystal Gale Fraser Vaji, Shiwan Katat, Juliet Mary Bullock Shahan Inchu, Guyet Si Dichu, at Marka Andre Shitsu to Inshu, at Richard Bullock Shitsi to Inshu, Inuvik Gwitsak Gwitchia Gwitshin Ethli. Good afternoon. My name is Crystal Gale Fraser. I'm the daughter of Juliet Mary Bullock and Bruce Fraser. My grandparents were Marka Andre and Richard Bullock. I'm originally from Inuvik and Tree River, Gwitchia Gwitchin. It's my honor here to moderate this afternoon's panel. I would like to formally welcome you to Gwitchin and Inuvialuit territory. Our ancestors have been here since time immemorial, and they continue to be with us today. And so I would like to thank our relations, I would like to thank our spirits, I would like to thank our animals in giving us strength and guidance as we move forward in this conference. As many of you might know, the history of Inuvik is complicated. This is a government-built town from the 1950s. And if any of you are familiar with our colonial history, this site, this complex, as well as the adjacent lands that way, used to be where Inuvik's former residential schools sat, Grolier and Stringer Hall. Grolier Hall was among the most notorious in Canada, and it closed in 1996, so just over 20 years ago. As I listened to all of these insights and knowledge and presentations, I will admit this is not my field of expertise. I'm a historian and a contract instructor at the University of Alberta. So a lot of this is fairly new to me, but I will urge everyone to use caution as we talk about these things. There are various concepts that have come up, such as industry, such as the Northwest Passage, such as the duty to consult. And all of these terms are not our traditions. They are linked to colonialism, they are linked to capitalism, and other policies that sought to assimilate Gwitchin and Inuvialuit in this area. So as we move forward, I just hope that we can have these conversations in very respectful and good ways. And if you are lucky enough, if you are esteemed enough to be sitting next to one of our local elders, I really encourage you to start the conversation, introduce yourself. It's our custom to say who you are and where you are from. So draw as much knowledge as you can in a good way. Okay, so this panel is now running from 2:55 to 3:40. And it's entitled Connectivity in the Northwest Territories. So first we're going to hear from Lyle Fabian from Catlow Tech. Then we are going to hear from George Tronsrue from Quintillion. And then finally, Inuvik's own Tom Zubko with New North Networks. So I will invite Lyle up to the podium. I don't have a presentation. 10 minutes, and then we'll have lots of time for questions at the end. Masi. So you have PowerPoints, which we can show.
Yeah, you can. Just that the problem with the PowerPoint is it has voiceovers that it needs to be deleted.
Okay. Whatever you're most comfortable with.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll just start from there. You know, we'll just go through it. Hi, my name's Lyle Fabian. I'm originally from Katlodici First Nation, a small community of 300 people on and 600 people off, the south side of the Great Slave Lake. And my mom and dad is Georgina and Frank Fabian. My mom is originally from Fort Providence, and my dad, Frank, is from the Buffalo Lake area, which is our traditional hunting area. I myself have, been working in this field not by accident nor by desire. You know, and you have to forgive me. My voice is, never like this. I have a cold, so yeah. You can thank my 2-year-old who sticks her fingers in my eyes and my mouth, and so that's where I'm at. So one of the things that I've always talked about in my community of Katlodici was one of my goals has always been about empowering my community. I was part of leadership for one term as council, and one of my innovations of what I always wanted to do was look at long-term economic sustainable development through a non-resource extraction mindset. And because I was part of back in the old day of the Mackenzie gas pipeline, we were all pipeline crazy all the way up until 2008 when it came to a grinding halt, and I figured that there has to be a better way of looking at long-term economic development. So my presentation, I'll just kind of glance at it, and it's not going to be what I'm going to, because it's, what we're talking about is infrastructure ownership. I've taken, what I've learned from the Mackenzie Gas Pipeline Initiative, the APG group, and we just replaced it with ownership of a different kind of linear development. The difference, that poses is always about less impact. There is no environmental impact, putting a 96-strand inert cable in the ground, and we're not transporting anything. The only thing we're transporting is, we're not transporting crude, we're not transporting sweet sour gas. We're transporting information, lights, points of lights from point A to point B. We'll just skip this stuff, and this is where I will talk about broadband ownership for communities, in which I myself has always looked at wanting to enhance my own community, in regards to broadband ownership, and what can that do. And these are the things that I've learned with experts out there that I've worked with over the years, and also looking at wanting to, how can we enhance our language and culture. And one of the things that broadband ownership can bring is I think this thing is it playing through? Yeah, can you get rid of that timer, because it's really distracting me. If you can go back to broadband ownership and just kind of like manually click it. Thank you. Yeah, so yeah, you could just leave it off. I don't need it. I know exactly what I want to say. So for many years, like I said, the broadband ownership in my community was an opportunity. And that opportunity was about, you know, taking a physical infrastructure and placing it in the hands of the community. And one of the things that I really wanted to do in my community was look at the relationship in regards to the Taunahee River in my community. And if you can go to a couple of slides, I wish I can. Yeah, so we'll stick to that slide there. It was always about language enhancement, and you know, and I'm not going to reiterate all this stuff. I'm just going to go to. Can you go to further down the slides of my community? Keep on going. Sorry. You know, all this stuff. You know, Brian Beaton has talked a lot about, and you know, touched on. I'm not going to reiterate all that. It's, you know, it's, I'm passionate about it, but you know, I'm not going to go over it again. Yeah, keep going. Okay, so this is what I want to talk about. You can just leave that there, and then we'll just go through it. In 2009, you know, one of the biggest things that, you know, my community that we wanted to do was look at, you know, what is broadband ownership, and we wanted to enhance the connectivity in our small community. So in 2009, you know, I went to Canmore. You know, I know that Canmore is in the building somewhere, and I've been giving her a hard time. And I told her, I'm like, if I'm not teasing you, you got to be worried. But, you know, Canmore, we approached Canmore at some point in 2009 and said, you know, we want to develop a community-owned wireless network to interconnect all our key anchor institutions, the daycare, the school, our band offices, because one of the biggest problems that we were having was the fact that, you know, we had to keep on paying for at that time was DSL. It's still DSL. That changed recently. But everybody had internet accounts in all the offices, and one of the things that I wanted to do was to, how can we minimize costs and bring better services in a small community? And so what we did was, you know, we approached Canmore and asked for an investment or a grant to help build a wireless network that would connect not only the schools, but also the daycare and other key, the network for the community. And what we did was, you know, we built a small, you know, over-the-shelf technology. We didn't buy anything fancy, but what we were able to get out of the network was 54 megabytes a sec of file sharing. And then what we were able to do was minimize broadband costs by just closing all the other accounts down in external buildings and just sharing, you know, a local network and internet access over that one kilometer network. And then we followed that idea up in 2009 of, you know, if we can do it wirelessly, why can't we do it over a 1 kilometer fiber optic network? And so we went back to Canmore in 2009, and again, you know, we took these baby steps for us to get to where we wanted to go, which was looking at broadband innovations. And so we asked for another $215,000 grant to challenge that we can build a community-owned local fiber optic network to not only bring better interconnectivity, not internet. I'm not trying to bring better internet. I'm just trying to bring better file sharing speeds and also share the internet to our key anchor institutions, which are all part of Ketlo Deche service providing services, healthcare, education, and so on and so forth. So we did build, you know, a couple of servers, and then we've also connected the, you know, some of the key local networks together over a 1 kilometer fiber. And you can just go to the others, yeah, and just pass that. And then in 2011, we wanted to, you know, surpass the capabilities of what we felt was the need to, the bottleneck that we had was you know, the DSL internet. The services still weren't to the point where we needed to be. So if you can just keep on going to another map. So keep on going. Okay, so, oh, I don't know. Does this work? Yeah. Okay, perfect. Okay, so in 2013, you know, the first year in 2009 and 2010, there was a multi-year funding grant that helped us build, train, educate, and also for the community to lay its own infrastructure. In 2013, we wanted to expand that, you know, that idea off the community and look at laying fiber from our band office all the way down to a drop that Northwest Tel's fiber currently resides off the reserve. And that's in, you know, Northwest Tel's cable comes along here and then goes all the way to Smith. And then we had their handhole here, and we wanted to, you know, bring this interconnection to bring better internet, and we wanted them to bring a better internet because right now, you know, at that time, they were doing a telephone line over the river and then into the community. That was a bottleneck for our network, and so, you know, we just felt that, you know, the next phase of the construction just made sense was to trying to get that interconnection. And these are just, you know, some of the potential of fiber in our community that can be achieved if incumbents were willing to work with communities to bring not only the infrastructure, you know, because what we did there was we were able to get 80% of federal grant investment. With a 20% investment from the community through in-kind contribution, we're able to get a robust infrastructure for almost nothing. You know, tell me what, you know, what industry will not kill to get something for almost nothing, right? And so this is where my idea came up, was again, was the fact that community-based broadband networks can help modernize our First Nation Indigenous communities. And community-based broadband networks can help industry, you know, not having to heavily invest huge amounts of funds to bring better services in a certain area. All they need to do was you know, work with the communities. They still can do this today, and this is what I've been promoting for the past 6 years, is, you know, First Nation ownership in broadband communities can help reduce heavy investment in a certain area. And not only that, but at the same time, the infrastructure can be leased to the incumbent to provide better services to the community without having to invest $1.3 million. And you'll see, if you calculate that, that is not even $1 million infrastructure for us to provide in the community, and it's a small community of 300 people. So now, you know, I figured this out, and that's, you know, my passion has been for the past 6 years is looking at building community capacity, putting the infrastructure in the hands of the communities, and then if you can imagine, you know, that the communities themselves building community-based networks and cooperatives, and building that interconnect to other communities. And then you keep on rolling with that same idea and that same concept, and giving access to people in the region who want to provide a service. So then the communities can lease their infrastructure to outside providers. And not only do they lease the infrastructure to outside providers, but you gain more service providers. Services go up, prices come down, and healthy competition is achieved. And, you know, you can have 6 or 7 players on the same network leasing infrastructure from the community. And the community wins. They don't need to be professional IT providers. They just leasing the infrastructure to those who can do that. And at the end of the day, the community wins. We help industry modernize the networks. The communities own the infrastructure, and we have more healthy competition in the Northwest Territories or other regions and other communities throughout Canada. And we have 663 First Nations throughout Canada. This is the kind of model that I've been promoting for the past 6 years. And for me, that has always been my passion. And I know that, you know, there's so many different solutions out there. You know, there's people that have talked about, you know, what they've done in their communities. And this is just something that I figured out on such a small scale and ran with that. And believe in that. And for me, that's what we need to do. The information that I give is always free. And I'm always here to help the communities look at these possibilities. And I won't go through my PowerPoint because it's, you know, for me, it's all about community-based networks. And I know I have a cold, I'm not feeling well, and I won't talk much longer. So that's, you know, that's my short presentation, and I hope, you know, come talk to me. I have a lot more to say, and I know that George, you know, has a lot to say too. So thank you very much.
Masi Cho Lyle, thank you. Agwinzi George, come on up. Do you need this?
I might use that actually.
I think you also have a PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Does that
just
look?
Need that one slide.
Okay.
Hello again. George Tronzer. I didn't tell you guys this morning where I'm from. I run a company in Anchorage, but I actually live and commute from Nashville, Tennessee. So I probably have the longest commute to work of anybody in the room. I'm not going to recover what I went through this morning, but I will make a few comments. As you look at the map here, see if I can get this to work. How'd you do that, Lyle? Oh, there we go. So what we have working today, operational, is this piece here, all the way down here and down here. You know, as I said, it's operating fabulously, but we have a strategic initiative to do an Arctic data center right in here in the oil and gas infield area. So for that to be viable, we need to have more than one route out of Alaska, which doesn't exist today. So as a starting point for the network that would go ultimately to Asia and to Europe, what we've done is looked at some shorter, less costly, much faster, in my opinion, smarter ways to A, diversify the phase one network that we have, B, serve some other communities that we think we can bring value to, and also improve the value of our infrastructure. So I'm not going to talk about this one, but we have a plan here that we're calling 2A that would get us the ability to run traffic this way, providing diversity for Alaska. But when we found out about this project being live the same time we turned our network up, as I said this morning, we began to look into this and have discussions about how could we connect to the Mackenzie Valley fiber. This is interesting because if we can figure a way to get down here and interconnect with some other carriers, we can terminate traffic to Chicago. We can also terminate traffic down here to Denver, which is important to some of our government clients that we're in discussions with. So what we're looking at, and this is very early stage, trying to build a business case for it. I didn't tell you all that you know, our company is privately funded. I think I did say that, but you know, the phase one investment, while it's not public knowledge, I think it has been disclosed somewhere in the press, but you know, it's several $100 million of investment to build the phase one. You know, a marvel engineering project. Our landing stations are I've built 70 different major fiber networks in the lower 48 over the course of my career, and you know what what we have done in the quintillion infrastructure is at the very top of excellence in everything that I've seen in being involved with billions of dollars of fiber optic infrastructure and development. However, whoops, went the wrong way there. Whoa, George, wrong button. Okay, so what we're looking at doing is we have a branching unit sitting in the Arctic Ocean right here. And this is about 375 miles of new subsea construction. So what we would do in 3A is build a new cable that would go from our branching unit here to a branching unit there. Most of this is deep water. This morning I didn't tell you our cable in the phase 1 system is double armored. That means it has 2 different cores of steel rods around the actual fiber optic, and then it's all encased in a very hard plastic type of covering. We had to bury that cable anywhere from 1 to 4 meters, which was quite a challenge. On this 375-mile build, it's all deep water, which means that it's a much simpler, much faster, much less costly installation of a fiber cable system. However, when we get to this point here, there's about 175 miles to land at Tuck, and that would all be shallow water. So I don't know that we would need to bury that network a full 4 meters. Maybe we could get by with something less than that, but that's going to be a fairly expensive and difficult project. And then once we get to Tuck, about 95 miles that we all rode on the bus yesterday to get down here to Inuvik. And that piece would also have to be built new. Unfortunately, when the road was built, there wasn't any conduit put in the road to allow us to easily install fiber. So now we're going to have to work to either install the fiber network in the road or alongside in the tundra. Very similar to what we did on the Dalton Road in our phase 1 network, only that was 540 miles of construction, and it was not in the road, it was through the tundra, which is difficult and challenging. And I think now, the Department of Natural Resources in Alaska and the Department of Transportation, we and 2 other providers put that fiber route in over about a 3-year period of time. And there is a disturbance to the tundra when you do that. And while we're doing everything we can to restore that and make it as close to normal as possible, that's a challenge as well. So that would be a major engineering discussion in actually doing this. However, if we could get all that done, once we got down here to Inuvik, we would look to find a way to leverage this existing fiber, which I believe is owned by the Canadian government. So I would want to try and see if we could get a long-term lease of fibers that are not lit on that route so that we wouldn't have to build it ourselves, but we could take advantage of it, which saves money, speeds time. And then once we got down here to Edmonton, or if we could get further down here to Calgary, CenturyLink has a pretty substantial interconnection point down here, and if we connected with CenturyLink, we basically would have access to their entire global network. So I'm talking to CenturyLink about this and about some other things that we might do, trying to see who all has a community of interest here that would allow us to actually do this. So reduction of our capital costs is important. I've told our investor that I don't think we can continue to fund everything through equity. That is quintillion equity or our investors' equity. So we're looking for partners. We're looking for government involvement, either in terms of reducing the amount of capital or being an anchor tenant for us. So to the extent that we can make that interconnection, and then if we could pick up traffic here and go back this route all the way down here, we can terminate that traffic back up into Seattle and give a complete diverse route. So, something like that would be a long-term contract as a part of the business case. I mean, these are all the moving parts that we're working with. So, you know, many of the people that I need to speak to are here at this conference, which is one of the reasons that I came, in addition to just being invited and wanting to share our story with you, because I think we can bring some, you know, some success and experience to what it is that can help serve these markets in a way that is in line with what you're looking for. But I look forward to meeting with people here who think this may be of interest. There may be a role that you can play in pulling together the business case. From a timing point of view, for us to do this, my hope and intention would be that we would have you know, a business case that would be put together and approved sometime in 2019. In parallel with that, we could begin to do certain pieces of this from an engineering and licensing point of view, and potentially do the work in the 2020 season and have a interconnection to our phase 1 system in place sometime late 2020, early 2021. So all preliminary planning. I'm motivated to figure out a way to get this done. I'm looking for other people that are motivated and excited and can help us figure out how to do that as well. So thank you very much.
Masicho George. Now, a name that we're all familiar with, I will invite Mr. Zubko up to the podium.
Thank you. I don't have a PowerPoint for you, so you're going to have to do with my droning voice. In a former lifetime, I was a pilot, commercial pilot. One of my favorite trips and visits was to Tree River. I always welcome there and always enjoyed myself. I want to talk to you today about our adventures in internet, going back to when we first started. My first experience with internet was in the early 1990s. We were able to get online with to do rudimentary searches with search engines like Gopher and others. It was very exciting stuff. We were able to find equipment and materials that helped us in the aviation business. We were able to find information on things that we didn't know much about. But it cost us $1.10 a minute, so because it was all long distance. So you had to really want some information in order to take the time to go through and do those searches. We had the cable system. We bought the cable system, or bought the license for the cable system in 1990. And we put a two-way system in because we were backhauling video from various parts of town. So we were set up for two-way data. In 1996, I was at a conference in California, and I was sitting at a table with some people from Toronto who told me that they were going to put up an internet feed on one of the Ionic satellites. We jumped straight into that, and we're their first customer. I think they gave us 300 kilobits, which was phenomenal. We went out and bought a system of modems. There was no DOCSIS at that time. We went out and bought a system of modems from Zenith, and we put lots and lots of them into the community. It was kind of interesting because our customers would come back from the south and they'd say, "What's this dial-up stuff that they have down there?" So many of our customers were, their first and only experience was broadband. The The company that we got the internet from was called CanCom. It eventually morphed into what is now Shaw Broadcast. Unfortunately, as the demand for internet has always increased at least 50% a year, they ran out of transponder space, and the economics for them didn't look very good, and they shut that system down. So we were quite vested in keeping that going, so we got a T1 from TELUS and routed it up through Northwest Tel. It cost us $8,000 a month. About the same time, the phone company put in internet, and that, of course, was put some competition into the mix. So with the T1 trying to serve, 100 or so customers, my guys became very, very adept at leveraging and twisting every meaningful bit out of that stream. It didn't work very well. Half is not enough to really do too much. We ended up trying to aggregate DSL modems for a while. That was a lot of work. It was continuous and constant tuning. But we did have a core group of customers who wanted our internet on cable. Of course, DOCSIS came along, and that made quite a difference to how operations worked. So we skip ahead to 2007. The Swedish Space Corporation came to Inuvik and started talking about putting satellite dishes in. I took it upon myself to try and make sure that people didn't get in the way of that project. We take our premier, who had been on town council here in Inuvik, to Sweden and Germany to see what was going on with the satellite ground stations. He was quite excited about it. And we took the opportunity to press on him that in order for that industry to grow, we had to have fiber here. So we spent a lot of time lobbying the territorial government and others to make what became the Mackenzie Valley fiber line a reality. So as soon as it became available, which was for us 11 months ago, we got a whole bunch of bandwidth. We went from 10 megabits that we were paying $8,000 or $9,000 a month for to 40 times that. So it made a huge difference. We were finally able to offer internet with some reasonable expectation of making a profit. We went from probably 10% of our customers having cable modems to 75 or so percent. So, very, very happy with that. And we just got an order recently for 2.5 times the bandwidth that we currently have, and that's almost done. 2 out of 3 carriers are up with that upgrade. So, we look forward to all of the other kinds of benefits that this community, true high-speed internet. We're 25 megabits right now. We'll be going to 100 in the near future. So we're quite excited about that. I want to tell you that throughout all of this, these machinations that we went through, we watched different government programs come and go. There was quite a few programs that the government placed for subsidies. The problem I always had with this is that subsidies that were offered were for infrastructure, local infrastructure. And quite frankly, we never did need that. So none of these government programs were really of much value to us. What we really needed, and I think what a lot of places in the world need, is access to reasonably priced bandwidth. You know, we went through many years of having our wholesale internet costing more than the phone company was selling retail. You're never going to get competition, meaningful competition in that kind of a scenario. We were just stubborn. We weren't really out. We knew we weren't making money with the internet, but it was strategic. A lot of people questioned that. You know, when are you going to get to the strategic part? And we did last November. So it's been what, 22 years of strategic planning. But back to the issue of bandwidth. You know, once we got reasonably priced bandwidth, we were able to compete. And I expect that we'll probably see some other competition in the next not too distant future, simply because the price of bandwidth is where it needs to be in order to have people invest. A government program can buy you all the infrastructure you need, but if you have to pay, you know, $100 per customer for your connectivity, you really don't get to a model that's going to work. Back 20 years ago, there was lots of people in the territories all across to Inuvialuit, and they were all prepared to put in internet services, and most of them were trying to put in internet services, but the wall they always ran up against was the cost of bandwidth. So I'm going to leave that with you for your consideration, because we've never seen any significant support for subsidized bandwidth until the territorial government decided to put in this fiber line and realized that the local communities needed to benefit from that. There's a ways to go on that project. I'm sure you've heard some of the discussions about things that need to be done. We're trying a few. We're here and we're in Norman Wells. And I don't know if we're going to get beyond that. The very small communities have challenges, but Lyle spoke to some of those solutions, which I think you know, he's shown that it can be done. That's about all I have to tell you at the moment. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. That was all very informative, and I'm sure there are questions, which I believe we have a few minutes now for questions. Is there a microphone that is circulating the room? Oh, right up here. Okay.
Thank you. Oh. Hello? Yes, it is on. Thank you. Thank you very much. I guess very interesting presentation, so thank you. So I guess the question is probably for the three speakers. Understood from Lyle that it's one possible model is between communities. Once you've built your own community in terms of your own internal networks, to interconnect communities even at the community level. That's obviously one interesting aspect, but I guess if there's many communities spread out, that as further to become from each other, I guess maybe more difficult it is. Another model, of course, is for governments like Northwest Territories to build the fiber, or private sector like Cotillion. So going back to the main problem that was identified by Tom, which is kind of that backhaul, relatively not so costly backhaul solution. is there one model or is there multiple models? And should there be a lot more competition in this backhaul? Or have you found that, for example, with Mackenzie Valley Fiber, that the prices have gone down so much that there are very room or desire for even more competition in that space?
Hi. There is, one of the things that, to answer your question is that one of the things that we're dealing with right now is not only in the Northwest Territories, but other sections of Canada, is developing a true, open access model network, which really facilitates access to wholesale broadband providers, and not broadband providers, but also wholesale broadband pricing to people who want to provide a service within said ABC community. For me, I believe that gaining access to companies like Quintillion and utilizing and working with Mr. Zupko here, who's done the work and are looking for those that next investment. Working with the community are the key to modernizing our networks. Because it's right now, one of the biggest issues that I see here in the Northwest Territories is that I can afford, my Bell service. I was in the community of Trout Lake, and I was happy that I can get 3G, 4G, and everything's great. But I started to realize that within the community there's a huge disparity in regards to haves and haves not. The people who worked in the band offices and government contractors who worked in that community had cell phone packages, can pay for it, because they were gainfully employed, working at the band office or some sort of government contract that they keep themselves employed. And then you have the people who are the hunters and trappers who don't have continuous jobs, or seasonal workers and so on and so forth. I've seen a lot of people in the community carrying iPhones, and I'm like, oh, you have an internet package, or a cell phone package, and they're like, no. I have bad credit. I have no credit. I have no credit history. I don't have a daily job. I'm a seasonal worker. I bought this from some guy from Edmonton, or no, some guy from Yellowknife who sent it on the plane, and it's a secondhand phone, and I just go to the store and spend all my money on prepaid cards. Because one, I don't have a job. Number two, I can't afford a $40 data plan, plus long distance unlimited throughout Canada, which I can afford, right? But for him, it was just it wasn't a reality. The cost per data per gig here in the north, companies would tell you that that build these fiber infrastructures, that there's a huge cost. Yes, there is infrastructure costs, but to connect two communities on a locally owned infrastructure, what we were able to see was there was no cost for us to upgrade the network, when all we had to do was change a switch on one end, which is a 1 gig switch, and a 1 gig switch, so our network was 1 gig. In order for us to upgrade the network, we didn't need to pull out all the infrastructure. All we did was we put a 10 gig switch on one side and another 10 gig switch, and all of a sudden your network's a 10 gig switch. And there is no cost to send that data over strands of fiber that has no that the communities can own the infrastructure if they just have the willing. It just like Brian said, just do it, right? Mm-hmm. And it's to that point where you have to have, where I found out, in my community, one of the biggest setbacks that I just, found out, traveling back, EO decided that, and I told them, I'm like, it costs you nothing. And yet they had the audacity to sell the network, the infrastructure, to Northwest Tel. Mm-hmm. So everything that I worked towards to bring ownership of infrastructure, and then it just took, one person to convince chief and council that it was in their best interest to relinquish control of this infrastructure and put it in the hands of the incumbent. Mm-hmm. Because they know what they're doing. Mm-hmm. Right? And I'm like, huge step back, huge disappointment for me, because it's not the way that I designed. It's not the way that I dreamed it, right? And for me, that model of community-owned infrastructures is a huge key. It's their economic future. We need to work with companies to help us manage and build these networks. Working with Quintillion, poses a huge economic opportunity, not just for Northwest Territories and Yukon, but Tuk, Inuvik, McPherson, Sigachik, Norman Wells. We're talking about a top-down service that everybody will benefit. Everybody can win. And it's that kind of opportunity, that kind of innovation that we need, not only the Indigenous our leaders to understand, is that they need to understand that they have the capability to own it, use it, utilize it, lease it, and benefit from it. You don't need to be experts, just lease it.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that question, and thank you to Lyle. I've been given the wave, but I like to break the rules, so let's have one more quick question. Anyone out there? Final thoughts?
I have a comment on,
yes,
on the question we just had. One thing, I've been in the fiber business since the mid-'80s, and the very first network I was ever involved with was in Chicago, and we built 3.5-mile fiber network, connected all the exchanges, all the big buildings, and competed with Illinois Bell, and designed products that they didn't have, came out with pricing that was lower than they had, and we were tiny. We were a small, little, tiny company, zero revenue when I went. I was surprised to see how quickly that big monopolistic company changed both their pricing and their product in response to just a little bit of competition. Now, that company ended up becoming MFS Communications, which got bought 10 years later for like $14 billion. But one thing I've learned, I've seen this over and over again on the fiber side, is that when there's competition in a market, three things always happen. One, products get better. Two, service gets better. 3, price goes down. I've had the opportunity to be involved in building networks in the lower 48. Big NFL cities, middle cities like Nashville, Tennessee, small cities like Mobile, Alabama. These markets are a challenge because of their location, because of their geography, and also because of their size. So your question is, is there room for competition? There's always room for one. There's always room for one. And if, whether they're business, residential, whatever, they're going to be at the whims of whoever the provider is, and they're going to get what the provider wants at a price the provider wants, and at a oh well, we'll get to it when we need to, oftentimes. Competition keeps everyone sharp, but there is a cost of competition. There's a capital cost to get in to a market, and depending on where that capital comes from is going to depend how quickly you're going to see service improvement and price reduction. So right now we're working with, with our clients to come up with new offerings that they didn't design. You know, we're trying to come up with a 20 meg or 25 meg residential product in our markets, and we're having to make some concessions and work with them to be able to do that. And we're doing it because the people deserve it. It's going to be a lower return to our company than in some regards, but we're trying to, you know, figure that out through different, you know, restrictions of use and whatnot. But at the end of the day, you know, we serve about 20,000 people across our markets from Nome to Prudhoe Bay, and you know, they deserve to get better than what they have today. You know, we have a huge first mover advantage, and that's the other thing that goes with competition. That first person in, unless they just do a terrible job and everyone hates them, they're gonna be okay, especially if they're not the incumbent. Whether or not, you know, there's markets like Chicago, LA, New York, you know, in the 90s when, you know, I was in different select companies, sometimes there was 4 or 5 providers in some of those markets because there was so much business opportunity that you could just go on to the next guy. You know, in markets like what we're talking about here, you need to get everybody in the market to at least consider your product, to be able to get that capital return to be in the market in the first place, unless that money came through a channel that, like Lyle's saying, where, you know, private return on investment isn't driving your decisions. You know, that's not the situation that we're in, but we're still trying to do the right thing that we can do to the extent that we can influence it. Is there room for a third or a fourth competitor? I don't know. It depends. It depends on technology. The other thing that happens is the cost of technology comes down. You know, every 5 years it's going to get cut in half or more. So that you know, the cost of fiber, the cost of modems, the cost of electronics, all of that goes down. So as you see that kind of compression in a market, you know, that allows more than one competitor. So I don't know. It's kind of a rhetorical question, but markets that have no competitor, not good. Not good. Not good for the people, not good for the businesses, not good for the future. So.
Thank you. Okay, well, I think that wraps up our time on this panel. I believe we're launching directly into the next section without a break. So please don't go too far. And me in thanking our experts.
like we imagine it to be, but maybe their way of categorizing things is completely different. So this has been like a great opportunity to rethink how we get connected, how we access that knowledge, and can recreate the internet from another place. Another one was the community that wanted to have a TV. It was a TV that they first imagined through wireless connection, like a local network where people could see streaming through a mesh network. So we had a TV workshop to learn only free software technologies, like IceCast, Blender, OBC. And it was great because free software and indigenous communities, we have found that they shared a lot of values and way of doing things like sharing knowledge and doing things collectively. And that community right now is broadcasting through Facebook. Like, the workshop was very important because they are aware of what a free software or the smaller challenge that we have faced is more the community process and the sustainability of the network of people supporting the technical network. So those are like the two practices I wanted to share from Mexico. And I think, Jane, we're going to have now I mean, I know this is from a very different context, probably, from Canada or the States, but I think we shared many things, which is trying to make connectivity from different context and from the way indigenous communities have so long defended and that we have so much to learn from them. So if we can get in the tables that we are, or I don't know if there's like one person or two sitting together in one table, if we can gather and share any practice of capacity building that you can recall or that you would like to share, and then one of the table can come and share it, right? So we have around 15 minutes? Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, we're all wrong. Get over here.
Which table is ready to present back to the group? Put your hand up. I see it. Okay. Jane, do you have a mic? Yeah. Could we get a roaming mic over to the table here? I see it right there.
Hello. Okay, we're going to do a quick readout. Hi, everybody. Yoo-hoo. Ready? Okay, so I've typed this in really quickly, and what these are best practices and some other capacity development, capacity building practices that are going on right now. One, you can form ICT centers of excellence to do training with First Nations communities or Indigenous or Inuit communities around Canada. You could do this in the US too, but you bring kids to you to help train them in IT. Know your government institutions and what's out there. There's some funded local government institutions in microfinance. That's through a MuralNet project. Schools, government funding, make sure you know how the kids are being trained in STEM and other ICT, and try and work with them. R&D from the, this is cellular, check out the government programs so that you know how to start working with people and know where the open source folks are so that you can ask them for help and training. Toolkits. We have an awesome action toolkit that was put together by a team at the Open Media Project, where they have a resource already available. They've got a Google, running out of battery, Google forum to network people and connect people because they don't want to be the center. They want to diversify the connectivity. So that's convening people online. And we've seen that too at the Internet Society as a hugely great way to go. Reach out to some of those communities and know what they need. Don't assume you know what's good for them, whether it's legal training, technical training, dealing with youth in certain communities. Fiber extension. Research and education networks are a good source of information. They know how to deal with governments. They know how to cut those deals. So know your people and know who to go talk to. And they're here in this room, so this is even better. From another First Nations community perspective, not mine, but from BC, from British Columbia, don't wait for people to come to you. Flip the model so that you're the one looking at your strategy, whether it's a labor market strategy, training kids, knowing what's good for you. Pick your community, talk to your community, message out so that you're the one getting the funding and they're not picking for you. So it's not a choosing for you. So it's a skills development initiative. And if you're smart like Denise, sit on boards, know people, so that they're not picking for you and you can determine exactly what it is you want for your community. Sorry, a little tired, but that's part of it.
Excellent. Those are great recommendations. Is there another table that would like to present back their thoughts? Because I'll call on you if not. The table where Katie is. Richard, take the mic and tell us what your table came up with.
Where am I looking? Oh. So we had quite a kind of wide-ranging conversation that was actually started in the abstract, which is we decided that actually capability building can come in like a couple of forms in terms of there's a capability to deploy useful services for the community with whom you're working. And there's also the capability to be able to build those tools in the first place. Both are valuable, and using pre-existing tools that are already available to be able to deploy can deliver immediate impact. Whereas the question was raised that does real autonomy come from actually knowing how to build the tools in the first place? And this is where we talked a bit about the work that Maria's doing with Rhizomatica in Mexico. And then we had a good discussion around how do people make use of the tools that already exist. So the platforms that are out there, ranging from Facebook to platforms now. And this ranged from people being able to swap and trade access to excess food and supplies that they may have. To a crisis where people will use the things that they are familiar with and have access to, and that to be able to reach people, that it does make, that it does make again sense to go to the places where people already are, rather than try to reinvent the wheel. But then maybe reinventing the wheel is how you become autonomous. So yeah, there was a nice circularity to how our conversation went, and that's it.
Excellent, thank you, Richard. We have time for a table right here, please.
So by virtue of note-keeping, I'll be the spokesperson for this group. And we found a lot of diverse opinions in abstract concepts, so we might not be in total alignment with all of them, but this is kind of where we ended up. It's true. Initially, we really wanted to focus on a needs-based approach from communities, whether they reach out to us or an organization or to respond to capacity building. So after identification of the needs, we would look to what are the assets and resources within a community, whether those assets and resources are tools and technologies or even individuals with capacity themselves, let's say for the potential to retrain within their community, and looking to the community champions who can provide insight as to the needs or the requirements within the community. And this is all kind of within a bit the community-based participatory research methodology, which is highly consent-based. So after recognizing assets and resources, you would then look to kind of community concepts, community methodologies for engagement, and mutually agreed upon terms. For instance, if a researcher makes promises to a community, they would have to fulfill them. That's just one example. So that's how you would have a mutually agreed upon buy-in. And then with recognition of the needs, perhaps providing professional insight as to anticipating, like let's say if a community says that we need broadband connection, but we have insight that says, well, maybe fiber optic line would be better if we're already doing the work. This might be a better technology for you in the future. So looking to the community buy-in and the guiding principles from the community, we would work to build and develop community capacity, and also throughout the whole process, we would have a reflexive consultation model in something that's appropriate to this venue, a cybernetic feedback loop of learning. So that's really reflexive. For both the researcher, or for essentially the researcher or whoever, to be responsive to the needs of the community, or even humble to their own involvement if a community says that perhaps the researcher is not doing as much benefit as their involvement would suggest, then to understand why and perhaps when to rein it back, and just to be honest with themselves about that. So yeah, a reflexive model really is kind of what is one of the terms we came up with.
Great, thank you. That was really helpful. So we are now at 25 to 5. I know everyone's tired, and we have a hard stop at 5, so we can be ready for the community event at 6 p.m. tonight. And I think a lot of people would probably like to go back to their hotel room to freshen up. So we have 3 breakout sessions that were scheduled for more time than we have. So we're going to do very shortened breakout groups for the next 15 minutes. And we're going to split up as follows. If you are interested in being in the breakout group on spectrum access in the United States, stay here. Don't go anywhere. follow the tall guy. If you want to talk about building a national access strategy for Canada or the securing the Internet of Things breakouts, go into the room next door. I thought you were from Alaska. I think you should be used to this. So we'll just go over there. It won't be long, 15 minutes. And Heather, you're wearing a parka, so you'll be fine. And there's some artisans with some nice mitts over there you can pick up if your hands get cold. So yeah, just follow us over there, and we'll split into the two groups in there. My request is that everyone be back in this room, seated, ready for us to close this off by 4:55, 5 o'clock. Laura Tribe and I will be leading the broadband group. Katie Watson and Natalie Dunleavy are leading the IoT group. Sound good? Okay, let's do this quick. Thank you.